In this episode of Unpacked,
I got raped, that's why I'm HIV positive.
Sexuality is irrelevant.
I'm a victim of toxic masculinity myself, and I'm a male.
In fact, he tried at some point to extort some money from me.
When I was young, I was groomed without even knowing about it.
You are defending the perpetrator, but at the same time, you do not want the victim to come out to the fore.
Today's discussion is going to be a difficult one. We're going to be speaking about something that is quite taboo and something that many don't actually want to talk about on a public platform. But we're speaking about sexual assault, and in this case, the victims are men. Stay with us. Rees man, Dirk Kotze, Okuhle Sithole, Toki Mohoto. 4 men who have bravely joined us to share their stories of being victims of rape. 4 very different experiences. Here are their stories. Let's unpack. We are joined by 4 men who have graciously given their time and come here to share their stories in something that I cannot imagine to be easy. 2 of them are with us in studio. Okuhle, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Sir, Rees?
Nice being here, thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, on VideoCon, we've got Dirk who joins us. Hi, Dirk.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And Toki as well. Toki, thank you so much for chatting to us.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity.
Now, I'm going to jump straight into the difficult part where, I'm a very proud feminist. But while I'm a proud feminist and I will have conversations around gender-based violence, I don't want to sit and ignore the fact that I'm anti-violence and I'm anti-sexual violence. And I felt like it was important to have this discussion because some of my male friends say they would never speak about anything that might have happened to them. So I want to go around to everybody and just find out what is your reason for speaking. And I'll start with yourself, Rees.
I think it's very important for me is that about 10 years ago was the first time that I spoke out in public about it. And since then I've been assisting and helping men, being able to deal with the trauma and the consequences of their childhood sexual abuse.
Now, in the case of yourself, Okuhle, I actually found your tweet on Twitter where you were basically saying that you're HIV positive because you were raped and you were telling your story. And I know this is your first interview. What was the reason that you decided to finally speak out?
My reason was I wanted to come out because I wanted to be an HIV activist one day. So since I was turning 3 years last month on my birthday, I decided to come out about my status to the world, to tell everyone, Guti, you can be who you are, nothing can limit you. So live your life and be happy with who you are.
And your side, Dirk, what made you decide to come and tell your story?
Well, the main and only reason I decided to speak out and continue to do so is to help other people. I know how much the telling my story has healed me, and I needed someone else to speak out first to convince me to speak out. So that's my only reason why I'm still willing to tell my story to anybody.
And from your side, Toki, why did you decide to come out and speak?
I think my first time when I started speaking out was in 2007, but nobody believed me then because it was taboo for a male person to claim to have been raped, 1. Number 2, to also have survived domestic violence. Because society would expect men to be masculine, they would expect us to be powerful and be the ones who met out injustices against women. But when it's our turn, nobody was willing to listen until I wrote about it. But of late, I'm seeing so many male victims of abuse, and I felt the time was now for me to also speak out.
And I think that's the difficulty of all victims, just in terms of the fact that no one wants to believe you. I can't even begin to imagine in a society where we have expectations of what men should be, what it must be like to come out and share. So let me start with you, Dirk. I mean, what was the reaction the first time that you told someone? What did they say back to you, and who was the person that you told?
My story came, it's a long story, I'll make it short, but my perpetrator, the story came out from other children first, and my family basically heard about it and they didn't believe him, or they didn't believe those children. So it was very difficult. I then decided not to tell my family because they didn't believe the other children until I could eventually not hold back anymore. I kept it for about 6 more years before I told my parents, and I told my mom and dad first. And they were broken. It took them a while to make peace with the fact that I didn't feel comfortable telling them first.
And from your side, Rees, I mean, who was the first person you told, and what was their reaction?
I was fortunate that I'm privileged, so I could see a psychologist. And I saw a psychologist at the age of 39, having kept these secrets for decades and not speaking about it to anybody. And the first family member or person I spoke to and told about it was my wife. And when you've been married, we're childhood sweethearts. So having just kept the secret from my family and friends and everybody around me, I had kept it very deep secret for my wife, the mother of my children, and it was very difficult for both of us. I mean, for me to say the person you married, they've got a huge past that you're unaware of, and for her to feel that I didn't trust her, or society I didn't trust at all about telling my story.
I want to come back to something that you picked up on with regards to your wife, but before we get there, from your side, Toki, who's the first person you told, and what was their response?
It was not a matter of telling from my side. I had to confess to my pastor that I'd slept with a woman, but it was not sleeping. The woman had actually been forced to prove to someone whether I was male or gay, and she had been paid to make sure that I do sleep with her. And telling the pastor, I had to tell him not from a point of view of a victim, but as a perpetrator, because society, he too would not have believed me. The first thing he did was to open the Bible and tell me how guilty and sinful I was. And years later, after my sister committed suicide, I started owning the narrative of a victim, not of a perpetrator.
Obviously, I mean, this is your first interview, where you are in a public platform, and I hope the fact that there are other survivors here makes it easier for you. But who was the first person that you told, and what was their response?
What happened, we went to go and check with my friends because I was sick and not knowing what was happening. So they are the first person to know. And then I called my sisters, I told them, and then that was it.
Did they believe you? Did they support you? Or was their response something that you feel they could have done better?
Yes, they did. They did respond very well because that was my second time trying to do a suicide. So they knew I can do it. Lucky enough, I was having people around immediately when I find out. So that was very easy for me to take it. And
that was with regards to your HIV status?
Yes.
So at what point did you then share with the people around you how it came to be?
About the rape part, I just told my sisters now because they didn't know what happened. And then, I started opening up about it and telling everyone, I got raped, that's why I'm HIV positive. And by 2 Nigerian, not 1 person.
We'll get into the details because I think the fact that everybody's story is so different, will also get to show people at home that there isn't one picture. Sometimes a man, whoever the first man would have been to come out and speak. I mean, you've been speaking publicly for a long time. People might look at your story and think that's the poster of what a man being raped looks like. That, oh no, he must have been a child that was defenseless, or, you know, it must be because of... I think it's important that we share that there are so many different stories, and each story is unique in its own way. I'm thinking, just to come back on something you said, you mentioned that your wife, you know, obviously it was difficult for you and your partner because you've been carrying around this secret so long. Do you believe that a person who has been a victim of rape should have to disclose to their partner? And obviously it's a personal choice, but do you feel like a person should have to disclose to their partner?
I don't think the word should. I think you need to be empowered yourself, and it's at your choice and at your time. But what I do regret is not doing it a lot earlier.
And why is that?
I think I didn't believe that people would understand. I mean, when I started looking in the net and trying to investigate it, I, for 15 years, thought I was the only human being or the only male in this country who had gone through my specific experience, who was groomed by a sports coach and then also raped later on in my life. And I thought, because you blame yourself. It's the self-blame, it's the anger, the self-hatred. All those things that the perpetrator should have, you carrying internally. So you feel that, how can you tell somebody, because it actually was your fault. You shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have done that, you weren't wise enough. And it's very difficult to be able to tell somebody who you had a long-term relationship with. And I think you own your past. And I think you need to try to communicate it if it affects other people's future. And I think that's, for my regrets, that's my regret. We're lucky that I could work through it. My wife and I could work through it. But there's lots of other men whose partners didn't accept it and couldn't move forward because they felt betrayed.
And that, for me, just boggles my mind. Is the betrayal because you feel like you didn't trust me enough for the secret, or is the betrayal the feeling that, you know, oh, you might be a little bit damaged and I should have known before I choose to be with you, if I'm making sense? What is that betrayal that a partner would feel?
But I don't think the word damaged is, I think...
And inverted commas damaged,
Yeah, because I think the word damaged is that's one of the reasons we don't want to come through. We don't want to talk about it because of a lot of the taboos.
Yes.
That, first of all, males don't get raped, period. So most people don't believe that. So if you had to tell somebody, there's a total disbelief. The way we are socialized as children, that men, and that brings to your feminism side, is that the hypermasculinity,
and the toxic masculinity.
I'm a victim of toxic masculinity myself, and I'm a male, because I was brought up that cowboys don't cry, you need to take control, you're not supposed to show your emotions. If you cry, it's a sign of weakness. You do not discuss your innermost thoughts with any other male. We always tell each other we're fine. Meanwhile, another male can tell you fine, and they could be suicidal. But we don't communicate as males. So the interesting thing is that I'm a victim of toxic masculinity because I was never brought up to be able to share, never been able to communicate with a woman, and all the men around me, from a childhood, even now, we don't share. We don't share our vulnerabilities. And I think that is, for me, very important. Is that I can now share with vulnerabilities. I never cried. I mean, it was probably, my kids never saw me cry until basically when I told them what had happened to me. And it was the first time. And I thought that the crying would be seen as a sense of weakness. But in actual fact,
it's strength.
When it has happened from females,
Yeah.
I've got it as a sign of strength. Some males still look at it and say, you know, crybaby, shit happens to us, so why are you crying about it? We're all carrying our baggage.
The other thing you touched on, which I don't know if you felt the same experience, Dirk. I mean, you mentioned privilege and being able to go to psychology. A lot of South Africans do not have access to even the concept of mental health, let alone the experts that can sit and talk about why are you angry or why are you reacting this way. Dirk, did you feel like you were in a space where you were privileged enough, and I don't just mean access to a psychologist, but I mean also privileged with information to be able to open up and speak?
Yeah, I was very lucky to have met Rees, and I actually went to him and spoke to him at Samsosa. He gave me reading material to understand things. My partner at the time also gave him some reading material. So I didn't go to a psychologist, but I had someone that I can speak to, a third party, not involved in my life, that I could just open up and tell everything.
In your case, Toki, what was your environment? I mean, did you have access to any kind of support beyond, finding a group of men that you could talk to?
My story is quite funny, but in all its funniness or appearance as such, I've never laughed, not once. The next morning, which was a Monday, after the ordeal had taken place, the same colleague who had organized the young woman to prove to him whether I was gay or not actually gave me accolades. I was touted as the man at work because I had for once, in front of them all, through their knowledge, proven that I also can sleep with a woman. But on the flip side, at church, I was seen as a sinner. And as a result, they kept saying, you can't be saying you did not consent to it because you were erect, one, and number two, you ejaculated. So it must mean that part of the package of you engaging with the woman was enjoyment. And later on, when I got to see a psychologist, this was after I encountered a domestic violence case. And the psychiatrist that I was referred to after seeing a psychologist said to me, two people exist within my mind. There's the victim and there's the defender of the victim at the same time. And this came because even my then ex-wife said to me, you're not man enough. And each time I was trying to say to her, listen, I may not be as intimate because I've got a past which you need to understand and know about. But coming from a religious background, the only thing she saw was a husband, a potential father, and a provider. There was no space for vulnerability. There was no space for an open, intimate conversation. And there was no space for empathy. I had to be strong, come hell or high water. So hence I'm saying my story is a bit funny, but I've never had a chance to laugh at it.
And I mean, it's so scary and sad that we all know that person that would never believe to this day. There are still people who, even after 80 people have named them in court as a perpetrator, will say he would never. And I mean, I will come back to your particular story, Duki, because in your case, the perpetrator was a woman, which has its own thoughts and misconceptions. And I'll come back to that because I think it's important to address. Okuhle, for you, I mean, you've already alluded a little bit to what happened, and you mentioned it was about 3 years ago. Can you share with us what you recall when you were raped?
I don't remember anything because I was a bit drunk. We went to the club with this other guy I was still dating by that time. And then he left me in the club because we had a fight in the club, and then he left me there.
And which area was this club?
Melville.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he left me. It's when I asked those guys to help me with Taxify. And then they said, okay, it's fine, we're gonna help you. And then when I wanted to go, I approached them again and said, guys, I'm getting drunk, can you please Taxify for me? And then they said, okay, we're staying around. We can go because we don't have our phones with us. We can go and Taxify. And then we went to their home. I stand outside, and then they got in the house, and then they come back. The other one came back and said, you can't stand outside, it's winter, or it's cold.
So you guys were walking?
Walking. It's not far from the club. And then we went there inside. When we get inside, the other guy is having the gun and is already naked. I said to them, guys, I can't stay here. Let me go and ask someone to taxify for me and go home.
So you weren't aware, it wasn't registering what was happening.
Yeah.
You just saw him with a gun and he was naked.
Naked already.
Yeah.
And then they said, we're gonna have fun. I said, fun how? Because I wanna go home. They said, no, we're gonna have fun. They took my phone, they locked the door, and then that's when everything started. After that, they locked me in the house. They went to the club again, I think, because they came up around 4 drunk. And then they said to me, yo, you can go again now. And then I went to the street. I didn't know where I was going because it was very dark. Lucky enough, I saw some security guys, those who patrol with cars. And then I approached them. I told them the story. They said, let's go to the house. I said, I don't remember the house because even here, I don't remember how did I get here. And then they took me to home and then said to me, go and open the case. I didn't go and open the case. And then I started getting sick. Lucky enough, in 2018, I got a friend around the area. So I was starting to visit the friend. So when I'm visiting the friend, I started to memorize everything.
So
I saw the house.
So just so I understand, you didn't recall what took place because you were drunk. Do you think that they had drugged you?
They didn't do anything. They just told me we're gonna have fun.
Okay.
And then I asked this other guy because I saw his skin. I said, can you please at least use condom? They said, no, you South African, you think you are smart.
Wow.
And then that's everything happened.
And in this moment, were you fighting them off? Or is it still a blur because of the alcohol? And I'm not asking this in any way to excuse anything that took place. I think it's to also just get an understanding of where your mental or mind space was at.
I was drunk. I said, no, it's fine. Whatever they do, it's fine.
Why did you feel that it was fine?
Because I didn't try anything. I was shocked. Uti, this is gonna happen really without anything. Because my phone was off. I didn't call anyone. I didn't talk to anyone about that. So that's when everything happened. But funny enough, I saw the house. I know the house. I'm still seeing these people. I met the other one and in the text, and then he said to me, you're still alive and you are gaining weight. I laughed about it and said, no, it's fine, dude.
So you actually bumped into
Yeah,
him?
every time when I go to my friends in Melville. That's why I'm starting to talk about this now, because I'm seeing these people every day.
Have you thought about going to open a case?
It's something that came up now. Which, okay, now I can do whatever it takes.
And, it's obviously the experiences are so different because the age and the power dynamics make a difference. But in your case, somebody sitting there with a gun, I know a lot of people, victims of rape, get asked, why didn't you fight off? Why didn't you? Not knowing how you will respond in that situation. In your case, you were younger.
Yeah,
what was your experience?
My experience is that it's a lot slower. When I was young, I was groomed without even knowing about it. So you've got an adult who's a paedophile who knows exactly what they want, and they're going to be patient and how they're going to do it. So they're grooming you. And
how old were you, just so we can
I was 13. I was 13, and then going on late up until I was about 16. But what happens is it happens so slow, and you don't realize it's happening. And these pedophiles are always the nice people in the community, the leaders in the community, the guy next door. As you said earlier, nobody wants to believe them. They're the teacher, a community leader, a priest. nobody wants to believe him.
And it's somebody that your parents are likely to trust, so you being alone with them is not an abnormal situation.
And that was part of the problem, because I was brought up to respect authority and respect elders. So for me, it was absolute respect. So I couldn't go back and approach my parents because I would be no longer respecting an adult. So the grooming process took place. And then
can we explain to viewers, because I mean, I'm very familiar with the concept of grooming. I think we need to explain what that means, because somebody might think, what do you mean grooming? And it's the best way I can think of right now is that you're targeted by somebody who gains your trust, who gains other people's trust, and they use their authority over you. They use your respect for them. They use the respect for the community to put you in a position where you doubt whatever is happening to you. And it can go in different forms. It can be gifts, so that if, let's say, somebody brought you something and you go home, you're excited that, oh, I got this gift. Now it makes it harder for you to come out and say what happened to you. So they almost convince you that you might be crazy, or you don't. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly.
And also what they do is they're moving your boundaries. So for example, in my family, alcohol and drinking was not acceptable. So they're moving my boundaries to get me to consume alcohol and to get me to be drunk. So then my boundaries are being moved without you knowing it, like specifically in sports. And we're seeing a lot of cases now coming up in sports, is those boundaries are broken. You see guys on the football field, on soccer fields, they're touching, they're grabbing, they're touching, and all of that. Now for a young guy, when this happens, he doesn't know what appropriate touching is by a soccer coach or a rugby coach. He doesn't know what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. So gradually they move these boundaries away until you land up in a position that you're actually powerless. You don't know what to do. And then the situation with me is when I wanted to stop, I was taken off the field, and I was a good sportsman. And then I was told, right, taken off the field, and he was told, if you tell anybody, right, don't F with me.
So you were punished, basically.
I was punished, but I was also threatened that if you told everybody, nobody's going to believe you. I'm just going to say that you're no longer worthy of your place on the field, and you're just creating nonsense. So what happens again in an all-male environment, the team will stick together with the coach, right, and you will get totally ostracized. So it's a form of blackmail. And also the one thing is that two people have mentioned here, and I think it's very important. When you mentioned about the flight and fight, the other human thing we do for self-preservation is freeze. That you make a decision based on all these things that are happening around you, and you actually decide that the best thing for me to do to be able to live for tomorrow would be to actually go with the flow.
Just surrender to whatever's happening.
And a lot of guys have always said, oh, I will fight to the death, I'd rather die. They weren't there at that moment. And another thing that came up is, and I think it's important that a lot of us experience it and we don't want to talk about it, and is the question of that erection.
You know, I want to come to that, because from the perspective of a woman, many women will say, and this is the word that they use, my body betrayed me.
Yes.
So in that moment, because your body has its own sexual nerves that are not even necessarily connected to where you are emotionally, psychologically, your body now responds to certain touch. As violent as it is, it responds as if it was something sexual taking place. Because let's be clear, rape is violence. It's not about sex. So now your body betrays you, where you get women who will say that while they were being raped, they started to get so moist that the rapist now is saying to them, I knew you wanted it.
Yes.
Or they'll make comments like that, which to me, it was a logical explanation to link it to what the gentleman is saying about his experience, and the other gentleman that, no, you can get an erection even if you don't want to have sex. I mean, men wake up and you can have an erection without even thinking about anything except, I just need coffee. Yo, Toki, maybe we can jump then to your story of how did you find yourself in a situation where, you know, anybody felt the need to get a woman to be forced on you to prove anything? Like, it just sounds crazy to me.
So as I alluded to earlier on, I came from a deeply religious background. I think from as early as around age 5, I was already a church member. I knew no social life except for church. So the only part of my life that was existing was church, home, and school. And I got my first job after graduating from college, away from home. I'd never been away from home. I think the furthest I've stayed from home was about 2 hours drive away. And now I stayed about 4 hours away from home. And being there and largely in an area populated by males who saw themselves as understanding and deeply immersed in a heterosexual environment, they normally saw me as someone who was abnormal. And the guy that I worked with, you used to ask me, how come I've never seen you with a girl? And he would poke to a point where he would go to women, propose on my behalf. And whenever they would come to me, I would reject the whole proposal. Hence, he planned and said to himself, if I could get him to prove to himself, because he felt that I was doing a disservice, not only to males, but I was also being injurious to myself, if I did not enjoy or have history with multiple women. And, you know, if the case had been reported to police, I would have been arrested because the woman was underage. She was 16 years. I was 20 at the time.
Wow.
And she was a schooler. And we came from a rural village where most people were deeply enmeshed in poverty. And some could have said, you groomed her because you were employed, and she probably accepted your proposal under the guise or assumption that you were going to assist her or facilitate some form of transactional sex. Now, when that happened with her, she even had morning after pills, which she was given to say to her, if the guy does ejaculate, if he does agree and ejaculates, consume this afterwards. And now, if I go back to the guy who organized everything and I said to him, I knew you wanted to prove something, but I wasn't too sure what it was until after it happened. And he says to me, in isiZulu, awujabulanga ukuthi usuyindoda. Aren't you happy that you finally become a man? And meanwhile, I'm thinking, already my physique tells me I'm a male. Socially, I'm socialized as a male person. At church, I'm viewed, and in society or community as well, I have markers or identifiers that depict me as male. But I lacked one thing. I was not sexually active. I was not promiscuous. And I had not been seen to be touting masculine or heterosexual privileges and powers around women. And they felt that I needed to be part of the clique or clan in order for me to be fully accepted by them. And the sad part about this is that you never get an opportunity to confess to someone, to say, this is what happened to me when I was young. I did not understand sexuality. I did not understand what my gendered role was, and I did not understand what masculinity or even being emotionally vulnerable was. Now I'm forced to have a non-consensual sexual experience with a woman, and I'm expected from them on to continue and tally up my record.
A child.
Exactly. So these are a child, definitely.
Yeah. So I just want to understand. So you were put now in a situation. I mean, you already mentioned the part about being, you know, having an erection and ejaculating. How did they even get the schoolgirl to put you in a space where you were vulnerable?
The guy I stayed with I was quite a novice at the time, and he was experienced because I remember, I think he was at the time aged 25, and he already had 5 kids. And the 6th would-be mother or soon-to-be mother was pregnant, but he was denying paternity. And he taught the young girl which parts to touch me on and what language to use, because he knew I was deeply religious. So obviously the point of entry or my vulnerability would be talking religious speak, touching on things that were seen to be holy or spiritual at the time. And as the gentleman has said, a bit of grooming took place. And the person who grooms you doesn't do so unless they've broke down your barriers and they understand your weak points or your vulnerabilities. Yes. And by the time they get to the actual physical activity, you are basically indirectly consenting. Not that you're saying, yes, I'm conscious, I'm aware, and I'm agreeing to this, but you've indirectly said, whatever happened must happen. And only after it has happened, you then realize, I've been in this situation, I did not want to be there, but now who do I tell and who is going to believe my version of the story?
Did she ever come out and try to paint it in a different way to what it was? I mean, other than reporting back that, oh no, he ejaculated, let's celebrate him. Was there ever a point where she implied that you may have taken advantage of her?
She did. In fact, she tried at some point to extort some money from me. And what she had was the morning after pill. And she came the afternoon, which was a Monday, and the experience that happened on a Saturday. She came in the afternoon and said to me, what if I were to have your child? And I said, you can't have my child. Why would you? And she said to me, remember what we did? And she took out the morning after pill. She says to me, if you want to be my man, we can continue. Nothing happened, but it can now happen. And you can continue to be my man and do as most men do in the village, provide for their women. It was a benign way of saying, I want to extort something from you. And also I'm blackmailing you because you did something you weren't supposed to do. And at the time, I did not know how to respond or what to do. And the very friend who had organized the sexual encounter was the one to say to the woman, have your morning after pill. I'll make sure that I speak with him. You know that you've slept with him, so he's definitely your man.
Wow.
Sure.
And it's such a complicated one because technically by law, the way that the law stands, if a child who is anyone under the age of 18 cannot give consent, those circumstances are almost irrelevant. But obviously we know the legal system is evolving and growing and changing. I've never come across this type of a case where, you know, if this were to go to court, the letter of the law would simply say, you penetrated a child, therefore. Whereas in your
That's
case,
correct.
you know, so how are you consolidating that for yourself, you know, just in terms of your healing journey?
You know, I've always said there are things that you can encounter, no matter how violent or traumatic the remnants are, they never just pass. You never get over such. I've been married twice, to tell you the truth. The trauma from that experience has lasted throughout my life. I've been married twice divorced. I've got kids that I cannot relate with emotionally. I don't even know if I want to say I even impregnated those women because I wanted to, or because society said to me, you are male, you are meant to be sexually active, you're meant to put your sperm into someone's vagina, and you're meant to be a father at some point. Therefore, you have to be this. And I can distinctly trace it back to that experience where I had not been ready to take a decision of an adult nature. I was forced into it, and everything else that happened after was me being in search of meaning, belonging, and healing. And no one would say you are taking all these sexual activities or even going as far as getting married because you want to. But I did it because for me, I was still trying to find meaning to what had taken place to me before. And nobody else could give me the channel or the chance to say this is what happened unless someone promised you intimacy, because you assume intimacy normally means trust. It means proximity. It means relating differently with that one special person. But each time you relate with them, they would say, indirectly, what's in it for me? As a male person, you either marry me, impregnate me, or we transact on a sexual encounter. But if you go back, as you rightfully stated, the law would say you basically raped someone underage, so it's statutory rape. But in my defense, I would say I was not conscious, I did not consent to it. And maybe a physician would say, but you were erect and you ejaculated, so case closed, you go to prison.
But I think it does go beyond physician, and I think we are a bit more evolved in our understanding of rape. We've started to see it in more of our commercial media, that people speak openly enough. And I think this part of the conversation is so important. And for me to also just highlight that sexuality is irrelevant completely. Like, I don't want anybody at home thinking, well, you know, maybe because this one is gay is why. It's completely irrelevant. Completely. Even though, you know, we all, I almost am thinking about the thoughts of, you know, corrective rape, where men will say, no, you as a lesbian, we don't know what this is. You don't know good dick, so I'm going to show it to you. That's literally the feelings that I'm getting from what you are sharing with your story.
Definitely.
So it could be
Definitely.
corrective rape.
Yeah.
You went through corrective rape, but from a legal point of view, the 25-year-old associate you were working with is actually guilty of 2 offences. Number 1, he's prostituting an underage individual. And number 2 is within the Sexual Offences Act, there's compelled rape. So he is C in the law. C has compelled B, the underage young girl, via financial reward, right, to rape you as the victim as A. So he's guilty of both prostituting a teenager or a youngster, and he's guilty of compelled rape. And within the law, he would be considered the rapist as well.
And I'm actually even thinking, while we may speak about your situation as victim and perpetrator, I am confident enough to say that she's also a victim.
Yes, absolutely.
She's a child. She should never have been in that situation. So victim of circumstance, victim of however many things. She's also a victim. However, your experience, if you're now sitting in the therapist chair, that would be your perpetrator. Over and above the other person who orchestrated. Dirk, I don't know what your thoughts are on some of the things we are sharing. You also went through an experience when you were young. And like you mentioned, the perpetrator was outed by other people. And you eventually came out and spoke. What was your experience?
Okay, my perpetrator is was a classic case of grooming, and grooming my entire family. Not just my parents, my uncles, aunts, cousins, brothers. The whole family was completely in love with this person. He was an amazing person. Everybody loved him. He was a very highly seen person. So a very clever person that groomed everyone, and so including me and other people as well.
What was his role in society and in your lives at that time?
He was a very good family friend, and he was also our family dentist in a very small town in Mpumalanga. So he had the opportunity to see me alone, obviously, at his work. He was my dentist. So my abuse happened between the age of 6 and 12. It continuously happened for about 6 years. And at different locations. He was such a good friend. He went on holidays with us. He went to the Kruger National Park. He came on holidays to Margate. And everybody trusted him with everything and everyone. So the abuse happened in both his surgery, where we went on holiday, at his house. He also had a temporary surgery in another small town where we sometimes went for dental work. He had all these opportunities, and just because he was such a clever man that everybody trusted him completely.
Now, you were 6 years old when this started. Did you have an understanding? And I mean, I'm sure there are parents who are thinking, oh my gosh, 6 is so young, that's a baby. Did you have an understanding of what was happening to you? And if not, when did you realize what was happening to you? Because a lot of victims of childhood trauma like that will say they didn't understand what it was, but they knew it didn't feel right.
Lebo, it's very strange, but I can't remember much of it. It's only, and I still get a where I start remembering little snippets of specific events. I think it's my brain kind of protecting me from all these things, because the 6-year-old me did not understand it. I don't even think an 18-year-old would completely understand it if it just happened. So there's not much that I can remember. But it's coming back to me slowly. The more I talk about it, the more I deal with it, the more I remember about it.
I'm so glad that you're mentioning that, just about the memories, because while one might envy the suppressed memories, I think few people understand that suppressed memories can still affect you. It's just that they are skirting below certain subconscious and conscious, but they are affecting you in ways. So a simple example is somebody who might be having anger issues and they're told, go get anger management. And only in those sessions do they start to understand why they're angry, even though things happened to them a long time ago.
I mean, it could happen with alcohol. People go to Alcoholics Anonymous. They actually deal with the alcohol addictive issues, but they don't deal with the underlining. Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be a drunkie and I'm going to be an alcoholic. This is my career. I'm going to start with cheap wine. I'm going to go on. I'm going to go to vodka. It's not like that. They getting absorbed into this addictive behavior to stop the pain, the emotional pain that they don't know they have got.
It's
because
medicine.
it's suppressed. They don't know what they're suppressing. Because we asked in one Alcoholics Anonymous group, just to answer a simple question, the men. We'll never disclose which group it is because of the way we are. And the question was, have you been sexually abused? Yes or no? 50% of the men in that Alcoholics Anonymous group were sexually abused. However, in all their sessions, not one male had ever spoken about sexual abuse. So even though they are at Alcoholics Anonymous, they are dealing with people who've all had issues in their life, the issue and the taboo of sexual abuse is still so strong that in that very comforting, supportive peer group, they're still not willing to show that vulnerability that they were sexually abused.
It's very just heavy in the sense that some of the people I've spoken to say to me, it's almost like it can come back in flashbacks where you feel like you dreamt it. Was that ever experienced for any of you? So now, when it comes back, if you're not in an environment that allows for you to process what that is, you can brush it off as just a bad dream. Oh, I must have dreamt that, or I must have imagined that. No, did you experience that, Okuhle?
No, not yet.
So, because I mean, in your case, you said you started remembering things, but you knew what had happened. So you knew what it was. It wasn't like, did this happen, didn't this happen?
The only thing I have now, it's anger issue, which I'm working on it. Because every time when I drink, I start fighting with people, which is wrong. So I decided, let me stop drink and work on myself first before I can. Because even if I get into a relationship, I start fighting people for small things. So that's what I'm working on now, my anger.
And am I correct in saying that while the toxic masculinity expects men to be more aggressive and to show their manhood in certain ways, when they are hurt in some way, it's almost like the anger is the toxic masculinity that was put onto them, expressed. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I almost find when men are hurt inside, a lot of the times it's either switching off by disappearing on their families, disappearing on their partners, or it's this heavy anger that you just can't understand why somebody is angry. Is that what you found with yourself, Dirk, or do you feel like you had worked through it?
I'm a withdrawer. I completely withdraw. So yeah, I'm a lover, not a fighter. So I went completely the other way. And however, I have to say I do get triggers. Usually when something triggers me and I feel uncomfortable, all of a sudden, just out of the blue, I realize, there's something that has triggered me that I need to deal with. And that's usually at those times when I start remembering some of the things that happened as well. And I can put it into place and deal with it, understand why I feel the way I feel.
Toki, can you share with us what your understanding is of triggers? I know a lot of people are using the term now on social media, but I think not everybody still understands what a trigger is.
I think in my understanding, a trigger would be an experience or a memory that is activated at a particular time, which triggers something either you have suppressed or some encounter you had gone through but not had fully acknowledged at the time as that encounter. Simple example was, in 2014, my late sister committed suicide. She did so because, unbeknownst to us, she had been a victim of multiple rape encounters. And the sad part was, out of these rapes, she had fallen pregnant too. And when the kids came to life, everyone expected her to be a mother, but she did not ask to be a mother. And everyone in society was first to judge and say, how does she act like a man if she now has kids? Isn't she supposed to be feminine, nurturing, and all these other qualities or traits that are associated with women? And only after I had fully been led into what sort of life she lived, not because she wanted to, but what society chose for her, I started grieving for my own past traumas, which I had not fully acknowledged. So her death, her untimely suicide became a trigger for me. And it said to me, church was wrong to say to me, as a victim of rape, you should be quiet. You are guilty. You should seek for repentance. It said to me, masculinity or males and heterosexuality were wrong to say, tigers don't cry, they bleed and die. And it was said for me to say, the people I had entrusted with my life, meaning the associate that I worked with, he couldn't understand the fact that perhaps I wanted to wait until I got married, or because at the time I did not understand what sexuality or what sexual encounters were, I chose to abstain until such time that I felt ready. And all of these accumulative experiences for me are triggers which in 2006, when I was now married, and my then wife couldn't understand why I was not open enough, because I had been taught to suppress things. As a child, I was not meant to cry, but bleed and die. And only after I'd gone to see a psychologist, she had said to me, you are defending the perpetrator, but at the same time, you do not want the victim to come out to the fore. And when I finally went for psychiatric evaluations, because I developed bipolar disorder, only then did such an encounter trigger to me what had happened to me in my past traumas as a young man who did not understand nothing about what it meant to be masculine, what it meant to be a man, and what society expected from me, and how was I responding to such expectations from society.
I think the difficult part about your story is us having to acknowledge the role of church in rape and protecting it. And obviously everybody knows of the stories of the Roman Catholic Church and the jokes that they make about priests. But the reality is, while church can play an amazing influence in somebody's life, they can also play a big part in ruining somebody's life.
I mean, my experience with males that I've dealt with is that the church take either two roles. And I always say, when men come and talk to me, I say, your religion is between you and your God, and you and your priest. And the priest must keep out of this area, and I'll keep out of religion. Because what often men come to us and they say, the priest has asked them that your fate is already been determined. So now you have to find out that this happened to you for a reason. What is the reason that this happened to you? Because it's your journey in life. And what are you going to learn from this? And how are you going to fight? For a victim to be able to deal with that, you feeling that you've been raped or you've been violated. Now you're saying that there's a reason for this to happen, and you need to find a journey. And then the other type of male comes to me and they've said that they've had to go into enormous amounts of praying in groups and with elders to find out what they did wrong. So again, they're protecting the perpetrator, what they did wrong. And so religion has got a part in life. But religion, when it comes to victims, they mustn't get involved with trying to put the blame on the victim. And in both those circumstances, they're putting the blame on the victim, not on the perpetrator.
You know, I learned a term recently, and I'm going to ask for my phone because it's so critical to what you are saying. I've got it on my phone, so I just have to share this term that I just learned 2 days ago, and now I understand why I had to learn the term. Spiritual bypassing. So I learned the term, thank you so much. The term spiritual bypassing is when you use your spirituality to not address other things. So, for instance, a person might be having serious psychological, mental, emotional things that are happening to them. But what do? Exactly what you say. Let's pray for hours. Let's search for the why, which, why impose that on a victim to now have to find a reason? Because then if you're looking at it from a religious perspective, you can also say, then why did God have to make it happen to me? You know what I mean? So the spiritual bypassing, it is bad. It is bad, bad, bad. It is, and I was so glad I learned that term. I just saw it by mistake on a YouTube video when she was like, this is what spiritual bypassing is, where now you want to cleanse, you want to chisam people, but you're not actually addressing the real issues that you're dealing with. This conversation does continue next week, so make sure you do join us for part 2. And yes, we're speaking about sexual assault where the victims are men.
In our season finale of Unpacked.
What's the difference between a female being raped and a male being raped?
The reality is you can be an asshole and be a victim of rape.
The perpetrators out there, they had already identified you.
We are the creators of toxic masculinity.
Men have to step up at calling other men out.
Stop helping people out of the river, go up the river and see why they fell in.
Nobody has the right to rape you.
That's Unpacked with Relebogile Mabotja. New episodes weekdays at 5:30 p.m. on my YouTube page. Don't forget to subscribe. Television edited broadcast weekdays at 5 p.m. Open up with S3.